Imagine with me, space aliens arrive on Earth and venture into a workout club. They focus in on a human with what appears to be a heavy object in her hand. She holds the object down by her waist and then with much effort curls her arm until the object touches her shoulder. Then she unbends, unflexes her arms, and moves the heavy object down again by her waist. The aliens watch in confusion as she repeats this movement over and over again. They pause, they speak to one another in their alien language, and then turn towards the human and ask in impeccable English, "May we get you a shelf to put this heavy object on, rather than you trying to lift it over and over again? For isn't this what you're intending to do? To find a place to put this weight?" The aliens, however, rightly so, are lifting up one possibility, yet they're missing the bigger picture of the process. We know she exercises to strengthen her muscles, to strengthen that core. Sadly, we can't just do it once. To put it on the shelf and be finished. Rather, strengthening our muscles is that ongoing process. It's one of the reasons why we gather to worship, to strengthen our spiritual muscles, to be people who have a spiritual imagination, to tap into what God hopes for our lives. It's what we call spiritual practice. Spiritual, meaning that we know that God is a presence that can be felt and experienced. That it means rolling up our sleeves to be a people who work for those who are in need, who have needs of hunger and food and shelter. That's what we mean by spiritual, a spiritual practice. To encounter our living, loving God here in worship and to continue those spiritual practices throughout the week that remind us that we need to open ourselves to God who is loving and compassionate and grace-filled. And today we continue our worship theme, Speaking Christian by Marcus Borg, and we're going to jump in to God in it'll take about 8 minutes. Are you ready? Maybe 9. What do you hear? What do you think of when you hear those words? God. A person-like being, an authority figure, a father, a mother, an interventionist, a lord, a jilted lover, a judge who is out to get you and me if we stray off that narrow path. God. You may wonder, Pastor Cynthia, with all that's happening in our world, why does it matter how we understand or even think about God, right? Diane Butler Bass in her work Grounded, that I'm sure you read over the summer, yes, along with me. In 1974, she tells us that anthropologist David Buchdahl argued that a cultural's understanding of God was central to its larger practices of social and political life. And when a culture's God is under stress or undergoing revision, the whole system is strained. He claims a change in the conception of God is a cultural event of some magnitude, especially because the character of a cultural is heavily influenced by the notion of God that predominates within it. We are participating in a major cultural revolution of how we understand God. It's actually happening globally. And why does this matter to our everyday lives? Stay with me. Yes, because we're moving away from the certainty, let's hold that loosely, yes, that we used to live in this 3-tiered world where there is this heaven and that's where God lived, and then the rest of us were on earth, and then there was this underworld that we hope we didn't end up going to, but we sometimes fear that we might. And what's happened in the last few centuries is this 3-tiered universe has crumbled. And what is occurring is that folks, many people, are returning instead to our early Christian roots and to our biblical roots with the reality that with us is God. Yes, there could be a heaven. Yes, there... Do we need to unpack the underworld today? Can we put that... Okay, let's do that a different day. That with us, right here, is God. Paul in the Acts says this: God is the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Borg calls it that encompassing sacred reality all around us and within us. Where are we in relation to God? Right in this moment, we are in God. We live within that God. We move within that God. We have our very being. God is not far off out there in some other universe. God is right here and is that is-ness that encompasses all that is. Yes. So the question then is not whether is-ness is, it's what is the is-ness. The is-ness is the reality of all. It's that wondrous more. It's the surplus of meaning. Paul Tillich calls it the ground of our being, the numinous presence at the center of all things that grounds us. Of course, it's challenging to preach about God, because what we really want is less talk about God and more God. More experience of that living, loving God, of that character that's gracious and loving and compassionate. Because in this moment, there's a God reaching out to you, seeking and desiring relationship. It's the God that created in the beautiful poetry in Genesis all that is, that was with Moses and the patriarchs and the matriarchs. This living, loving, gracious God. That was with Jesus, the 12 disciples, and is with us. We are that continuous thread. So then the framework isn't about heaven and hell. The framework then becomes about a God who's intentional about seeking us for relationship and desires the same for us. I imagine that you've noticed I've been cheating on the benediction. Benediction, as you know, is the final blessing. I usually remind us that we're beloved, we're loved by God, nothing we can do about it, that we've been named and claimed that. And here's where I've been cheating. I've been adding a little bit of a charge about how we're to go about living our lives, yes? So the charge has been, I've been sneaking it in, to go and live as loved, to lean into that God's love, the source of all that is, and the ground of our very being. Because I don't know about you, well, actually I do know about you. I think we hunger for that love, because I do too, to learn how to live there in these days with all that's happening in our world, in our daily lives. What prevents you from residing in God's character that's loving and gracious and compassionate? When do you find yourself, and I'm asking myself the same question, when do you find yourself slipping into that reality that think exists, where God is indifferent or punitive or threatening? What barbell do you need to pick up to remind yourself that there is a God who loves you? You learned one of my spiritual practices today, a dance party. Yes, when that punitive, fear-filled voice starts talking, I know I need to shift back into my body and that God who loves me. What is your spiritual practice that grounds you in the love and the compassion rather than the fear and the anxiety? For me, it used to be journaling. Of late, that hasn't been working. So I've been paying attention to what that means. And I know I need to pick up that dance party barbell. How about you? Or I need to go for a walk, or I need to call one of my beloved people, so I can work those spiritual muscles and be reminded once again I can live in the character of God that is loving, gracious, and compassionate. Y'all still with me? And in a few moments, I'll wrap this up. We're going to come to this table. This table where we get to receive whatever it is we need. If you're in need of forgiveness, if you're in need of hope or peace or joy or love, it's right here. There's a God who comes and meets you exactly where you are, and you can release the fear and the anxiety to God. And we take the bread and the cup, and it's that simple action of having that bread and the juice. That's one of our barbells this morning, where we are exercising our spiritual muscles of saying, yes, God, you love me, and I'm going to live as loved, even though I'm struggling with that right now. And then we're going to add some bonus feasts too, yes? Because the hope is that that bonus feast will remind you when you're through your days, when you eat, next time you eat a grape or a piece of cheese or a little chocolate kiss, that the character of God is loving and gracious and compassionate. And I hope you live there today and always. Amen.